We're going to start with some of the classic meddling Europeans of history, and that's, of course, the Portuguese. Somehow the Portuguese are everywhere where we don't want them to be, and they made it to Mongolia. Somehow. Welcome, everyone, to Unbelievable, the podcast where I tell my good friend two unbelievable stories, one real, one fake.
And I have to guess which one's which.
That's right. I am unemptied Latrine, Luis Mejia, joined here by Mongolian thoroughbred horse breeder Kurt Danner.
Ooh. Wait, does that mean I'm a thoroughbred or am I breeding thoroughbreds? I'm a thoroughbred Mongolian who breeds horses.
Let's go with that. And we are once again back to tell you some of the most incredible stories from history and have some fun while we're doing it, Kurt. I think we tend to often not highlight just how much fun this is for us because it's become a lot of a big competition throughout the years of us doing this podcast. But we realize it's just goofs and gaffs, right? At the end of the day, we're just having a good time at each other's expense, unfortunately. But that's been our friendship since we've met each other.
That's true. You know, every time we hit record, it's like we're embarking on a very long adventure, which is very fun and, you know, enjoyable to be on, but also irreparably damage and changes you as a person by the end of it, which, again, is another compliment. I don't mean to be a downer. I enjoy that part.
And that's not a bug, Kurt. That's a feature of our friendship.
Exactly.
And better yet, a feature of this podcast. And with bug talk in mind, I'm going to throw it back to you, Kurt, since I am going to be taking the reins of today's episode, telling our two stories. As always, Kurt, do you have a fun, quick, fast fact for me today?
I sure do. And, you know, speaking of thorough breeding, let's see what your thoughts on this one are, okay, Luis? So here we go. True or false? Orville Wright of the famed Wright brothers, of course, had another passion in addition to flight. So aside from flying planes, Orville Wright was a strong believer in the medical sterilization of non-whites, and he actually ultimately donated the majority of the fortune he made to organizations that offered free clinics to sterilize people without their knowledge. True or false, Luis?
Oh my goodness. You know, men gotta have hobbies, no?
And eugenics is for some reason always the top of the list.
Yeah, if we're talking about men's hobbies from before 1950s, eugenics is always there, unfortunately.
Not even literally being the first person to fly a plane will keep you from being bored. You're gonna apparently have downtime in which you've gotta, advance racial pseudoscience.
Well, that's right. And you know what, Kurt? While I don't believe that the Wright brothers really made a huge fortune with their planes, I don't know why. That just, I feel like no one really saw the gains in these guys flying. My belief in this man from early 1900s, from turn of the century 1900s, really loving race science probably beats out my other hesitation. So I'm going to say that's true, Kurt.
You're going true. Well, Luis, I am glad to tell you that is in fact false. I just completely made that up.
Oh, thank
God.
But,
you know, I will say, as I'm thinking about it now, I didn't go fact check that Orville Wright wasn't a eugenicist, so maybe I just got lucky, but as far as I know, it's false.
I mean, 1 in 3 people back then was a eugenicist, so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
That's true, yeah. There's a 30% chance it's a true fact. Even I don't know.
So no one go fact check it. Let's just believe Orville Wright was only known for planes and nothing else.
Let us find bliss in our ignorance. And with that spirit, Luis, let's get rocking.
Let's get rocking, Kurt. Well, let's move on to our two stories for today. And Kurt, we're going all around the world in this story, but we're somehow always we're always going back to a familiar place. Now, in recent previous episodes, we were talking a lot about the Holy Roman Empire and just the general Germanic tribes around there, or the Germanic kingdoms, whatever. We're going back to this time period, so don't worry, Kurt, in case you were thinking or hoping that we were going to stay away from our HRE era, I guess. We're solidly in it today.
Okay, great.
And we're going to go. And today we are going to go to the long, long ago time of 1184. So 1184.
Good year.
And we're going to the city of Erfurt in Germany, or what is now Germany, right? Erfurt.
Okay.
So I could pronounce it a little more German, Erfurt. It's not going to sound good. And to all German speakers, I apologize.
It'll be bad, but I could do it.
It's gonna be, that's right. So we're just going to stick with the anglicized way of pronouncing things for today's episode, just to save me any worries going forward. So,
Erfurt.
as we go back to 1184 in Erfurt, Germany, we come across the ruler of that province, of that region, named Henry VI of Germany, or of Erfurt, right? Now, Henry VI doesn't really sound too German. His name is Heinrich, but we're going with Henry. Henry, he is actually quite famous or quite important in world history because he was one of the sons of Barbarossa, the famed Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, King Henry VI at this point was going through some troubles within his kingdom, right? You know, we're at this time period where Germany is not a unified place. Germany is a whole lot of different kingdoms, and they all have squabbles and fights between them. It's bound to happen. It's been happening, and it will continue to happen, okay? And this time, the squabbles are being had by two different people. The Count Louis III and the Archbishop Conrad of Mainz. Okay? Now, these are just nobles. There's really not a whole lot of backstory you need to know with these guys. They're just having issues with land disputes and typical noble problems that happened in 1184. It's, you know, it's what's going on at the time. If you're in 1184 and you're a noble and you're bored, what are you going to do? Probably not race science, but rather settle land disputes. And we've got a land dispute in our hands.
Classic. Old classic land dispute action.
Now, we've got this land dispute between these two nobles, and Henry VI is thinking, oh, my goodness, this is going to cause havoc. This is going to be an issue across my land. I don't want to have more troubles that I already have as a ruler. I want to settle this. I want to make sure that there's peace in my kingdom, and I want to make sure that we all live happily ever after as nobles in 1100s Germany.
Are they fighting over like where the borderline between two places is, or is there like territory that they both think belongs to them?
If I'm being terribly honest with you, Kurt, no one knows. Actually, we don't know if this was a
secret third option that everyone hates.
Yeah, we actually don't know if this was even a land dispute, but most historians say it was probably a land dispute because, again, what else are you going to do?
It's a dispute, and odds are it was about land.
Exactly. I mean, you toss a coin, 1 out of 3 people in the noble times Germany are going to be having land disputes. So this is what we think is happening, okay? In any case, big strokes, broad strokes, there's issues in Germany. King Henry wants to solve them, okay?
Right.
Now, to settle this believed to be a land dispute, Henry invites both parties to have a conversation, to duke it out, with Henry as the mediator of these two parties in order to, you know, meet at a neutral spot and solve these differences. So he invites all of them to Erfurt, and he invites them to the citadel of St. Peter. Now, not only does he invite both of these parties, but he invites a bunch of different nobles from around Germany and a bunch of different high officials of the time period and region, whatever, to come and act as witnesses. So we're getting a whole convention, a whole DNC, RNC of the biggest figures in Germany, in German high nobility, okay? So
this is good because if they can't get the guys to agree, they can just like audience vote, you know? Let the jury of your peers decide who gets to live in the estate.
That's correct, right? So, you know, if anything, you're not going to make a fool out of yourself in front of all your friends.
True.
So I think Henry was really pushing the right mentality here.
Or maybe he understood what would later become reality TV.
Okay.
You know, he's just got like a daytime show running. He's like, you are the father of the estate.
Henry just had incredible foresight is what we're finding out right now. Just he had a knack for knowing the trends and hitting the trends way before Jersey Shore came to massive popularity. But anyway, he invites them to the St. Peter's Citadel, which is the main castle, the main fortification inside of Erfurt. Now, the thing about this is that the room where they happened to be was in what was St. Peter's church, right? So within the citadel, there was a church, and this place was also where monks resided, right? So the Order of St. Peter, they all lived here.
Okay.
And that's important because this place housed a lot of monks. And what do you need when you have a lot of people living in one same area? Do you want to take a guess?
Food, water?
Okay, think a little bit farther ahead from food and water. Once you consume food and water, what do you need?
Liquor.
All right, yeah, okay, I understand. But no, mostly you need a place to house all the human waste, right? So food waste.
Oh, true.
You need a place to house all of the different, even just excrement, right? Because if you have a bunch of people living in one place, you need to make sure you're removing all of this human waste in a relatively sanitary way. You're not going to be living alongside all your poop. Typically, I mean, who knows?
Most people don't know this, but they actually didn't invent digging a hole in the ground until 1922.
That's correct. And until then, they actually had a different system, Kurt, and that was latrines. Okay, so chamber pots.
Oh, true.
Or just places where you deposits where you just go. Sorry to be redundant, but deposit your needs and then throw it out eventually.
Right.
So
designate
you're not needing
some Tupperware and don't speak about it.
Christ. But yes, essentially. However, this being a relatively large order of monks, in order to, in order to accommodate all of the human waste that would be produced by the order, they decided instead to build a huge cesspit. Okay. So instead of just everyone having their own latrines, they built a huge cesspit, a giant latrine for everyone, so that it wouldn't have to be thrown out every single day. You could just wait some time until it was full and then empty it out wherever you were emptying this out. Sure, this would probably go to like a landfill or just the nearby river. It relatively unsanitary, but for 1184 standards, this is pretty good. This is pretty killer.
These are the pre-EPA days.
Well, fun fact, I think the EPA has banned cesspits and cesspools from the U.S. Because exactly all of this goes back into the land and then back into rivers, polluting everything that's around it. But it's 1184. It is pre-EPA days, so they've built just one huge latrine, one huge cesspool in a big area of this castle, in a big area of this citadel. Now, Kurt, the interesting thing about this and why I'm mentioning this is that the room that this huge meeting to settle a dispute between these nobles was the big courts, or like the big room for audiences, which was built above the cesspit.
Oh, that's not good.
It was right above it. I mean, who really knows what the smell was like in this area, but they built this place right above the cesspit. It was the biggest room, and naturally it was where we were going to hold this huge debate between these two angry parties with one another.
Right.
The day comes. The day arrives. Late July arrives. I think July 26th is the precise day when Henry VI invites the parties of Louis III of Landgrave, Louis III, and Archbishop Conrad of Mainz into this big room. Now, of course, this is medieval times, Kurt, so naturally, whenever you invite someone, especially a noble, they're going to have their entire retinue, right? They're going to bring their entire posse, their entourage.
Right.
So, Count Louis III arrives with all of his guards, arrives with all of his, I guess, royal accompanying members. Same thing happens with Archbishop Conrad, who arrives with his entire retinue. So the room is getting pretty packed. Now remember,
I'm getting
Kurt,
nervous. I'm getting really nervous.
He also invited just a bunch of guests and witnesses of the different noble families and high officials of the land. And naturally, each of them also comes with their posse, with their entourage. So everyone's coming into this room and filling it to the brim. Of course, naturally, expecting the worst, some guards arrive as well, dressed in armor, and their personal guard arrive dressed in armor, breastplates, steel plates, whatever you may have at this point. So this room is packed with a lot of people, and some of them heavily armed. Emphasis on heavily. So here's what starts to happen, Kurt. The floors of this room were wooden.
Oh, no.
And with so many people, the floorboards began to break. And they start to creak. And there were issues with the floorboards that were just really not strong enough to hold the weight of these over 100 people in heavy armor.
Right.
When suddenly, and without warning, Kurt, the entire meeting went to shit. Literally. What do I mean by this? They plunged down into this cistern, into this latrine for the monks. The floorboards opened and everyone started dropping like flies into poop.
This is like the opposite of the rapture.
It really is. You're getting a bunch of nobles falling into human excrement. Now, Kurt,
This is so terrible.
details vary, okay? But some accounts say that around 60 people fell into this waste, while some bring it up to around 100. So between 60 and 100 people fell into the cistern, and Kurt, they died.
Oh,
Okay?
wow.
Now, they fell in and died, and of course, some of them are probably going to die from the fall itself. If you fall wrong in any case, you're going to, die. Now, some of them drowned in this waste. They drowned literally in human excrement.
This is some vile
And some of them-
stuff. Were these monks like eating sauerkraut for a month leading up to this? Like, it's death on impact. Holy cow.
I mean, Kurt, I don't really think you need to only been eating sauerkraut. I think just enough human waste accumulated over, say, a month period. If anyone falls into it, you're going to have a bad time. And think back, you're going to be dressed in armor and swords and carry whatever. You're going to be heavy. You're not going to make it out of the human excrement pile.
I'm just saying, if it killed 100 people, like, this cesspool has a higher fatality rate than like a stick of dynamite. Like, you couldn't kill 100 people with one stick of dynamite.
Yeah. That's right.
This is a deadly cesspool.
And you know what, Kurt? Some people perhaps even died because of the fumes emitted by this
they just
cesspool.
suffocate?
Because think about it, Kurt. It's July 26th in 1184. It's a hot summer day. And it's probably been a hot summer day for some days.
Boiling up down there. Oh, man.
So who knows what happened, but between 60 and 100 people fully died. Okay. Now, curiously, the main three aggrieved parties here, which were Henry VI, of course, the Count Louis III, and Archbishop Conrad of Mainz, they were off having a private conversation when all this happened.
Oh, wow.
So when the floors opened up below them, they were lucky to be caught in like a stone alcove that was right below the latrine, or right below the floorboards. So they survived by hanging on to the metal railings in this castle and waited, hanging on for dear life from falling into human excrement until help arrived, and they were able to save themselves from the chaos that would become to be known as the Erfurt latrine disaster.
Look, I know that, in this moment where this happens and they're like dangling over the cesspool, there's probably like a lot going on mentally, but I really feel like King Henry missed a golden opportunity here. Like, they rescue him and then leave the two guys hanging, and he's like, okay, whichever one of you lasts longer gets the land.
It really was. But could you imagine the conversation that you're having with these two guys while hanging on for dear life so you don't fall into a cesspit full of human excrement? I think that's just a lovely image.
It would be such a simultaneous emotion of disbelief and terror. That would be just so strange to find yourself in and to desperately want out of.
That's right. It almost seems like a Dante-like or Dante-esque punishment, right? You've got all these nobles, the richest people in the land, all dying in human feces. I think that's kind of ironic and fun in some way.
Kind of beautiful. So what happened afterwards? Did they forget about the land dispute in light of this, or did they still have beef?
Well, really, I think everyone forgot about the land dispute at this point because
Everyone
it
forgot
fully
about
disappears.
everything.
I think when a situation like this one happens, you tend to have an empty brain, and you say, okay, whatever was happening, we're done. We're past it. But funny enough, it's interesting that, or I guess it was a bit fortuitous that Henry VI did not die in this event, because he would eventually become the Holy Roman Emperor.
Oh,
right.
This
So
must have been a sign.
could you imagine?
They should have known then.
They should have known then, but the person that was to become the Holy Roman Emperor could have died instead in just a huge latrine, which,
Wow.
frankly, that's glorious. Or anything, once he became Holy Roman Emperor, just imagine the stories. If anything ever happened to him, he said, hey, remember when last time I almost fell into a cesspool and died? Kind of crazy. Maybe I am meant to be emperor.
It's a sign. It's a sign. He's been selected by the god, singular. I forgot what empire we were talking about for a second. Sorry.
Yeah, please, Kurt, please. That kind of talk can get you killed in these days.
I will say in a church, it does seem like some, religious smiting. What do these guys have going on? This land dispute was over land that belonged to the church, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, we'll never know. I mean, one of the people involved in this was an archbishop. So maybe he was working as an intermediary for God, as they are wont to do, and just the powers that be got angry and released the floors. Who knows, Kurt? Are we willing to accept the supernatural into our stories?
I don't know. I just like the idea that this was like some sort of curse put on people. I don't know. Maybe I like it better if it's a coincidence, because maybe I just don't want to deal with the fact that I now have to accept that for all of us there's a non-zero chance that you could die falling into a vat of excrement. I wanted to believe that that couldn't happen if you took the right steps in your life. But clearly, none of these guys were planning on this, and it came anyway.
You know how some people say that they're disappointed that quicksand was not a bigger issue in their adult life? You know how they thought they would be trapped in quicksand more?
Right.
Well, now I think latrines should probably take that spot, because they've probably killed more people than quicksand ever has. So
that's probably true, just in this one go.
Just in this one go, yeah. I mean, I think it conquered the record in a single day than latrines have in the rest of history, which go Erfurt.
Man.
Good for you.
Got some wild stuff going on in Erfurt, man. That's crazy.
That's correct. That's great. And, finally, just before we move on to the story of the famous Erfurt latrine disaster, there was one noble who died among the either 60 or 100 who was named Heinrich of Schwarzburg. Right? Just another noble, just another person involved in this terrible, terrible disaster who did die.
Just another Henry.
He did die in this event, and he was actually known to be a relatively stubborn man and someone that was very hot-headed. And he used to have, I guess we could call it a catchphrase, Kurt.
Okay.
So Heinrich of Schwarzburg used to say, "If I fail, may I die in excrement."
Well.
A catchphrase to end up dying in the Erfurt latrine disaster.
I mean, that clears it up then. That's case closed. Okay, so this guy has something else going on, and it was just meant for him to be cursed, but everybody else had the misfortune of standing in the room at the time. So now, I mean, look, I don't want to tell you how to do your research, Luis, but I feel like now you got to track down what this guy had going on.
Maybe it was just a red flag. If your man is consistently saying that he might die in excrement, maybe don't hang out with him too much.
Maybe it was misdirection. Maybe he organized it, and he's like, no one will expect it, because I'm always talking about how I, implied don't want to die like this.
Right. But in any case, I think we can add this to one of the more funny instances of history where people meet their end in curious or sometimes even humorous fashions. Sadly, this one went the way of the toilet. So we're back to toilet humor, Kurt.
Wow. Yeah, we always find our way back somehow. But this I think is like a really nice addition to the list of people on this podcast who have tragically died in really humorous ways, i.e. drowning in molasses or potentially dying because you ate a golden fork.
That's right.
It's like I feel bad for them, and also I'm like, wow, it's kind of hilarious. I'm not going to lie.
We know that every person is a universe in themselves and every death is tragic, but come on, man. This is one for the books.
Come on.
This is one for the books. Well, that was the first story. I think we're off to a good start. We're off to an explosive start, and in a relatively I think we're fun. We're catching the vibe of early unbelievable episodes, I think.
We have a good balance of interest and disgust. I think we're right in the sweet spot, so I'm ready to keep this energy rolling.
Perfect. Well, with that mindset, Kurt, let's move on to a different place, a different time entirely. Now, Kurt, famously, You love horses.
I do. That's true. Big horse guy.
Yeah, he's a big horse guy. I mean, I think we've probably hinted at it during the duration of this show, but Kurt loves horses, loves a good horse. And if I'm being honest, Kurt, I think you got me hooked into horses as well. So it's because of you that I have just tremendous respect and care for horses now.
That's true. You know, I will say there was a long time ago trip where Luis came to my hometown and visited my horses. And I think you discovered that you have, you know, a horse might be your spirit animal. You guys did seem to have a lot in common. You were really vibe. I was a little jealous. I was like, come on, he's here for me.
I mean,
horses. Ridiculous.
I don't want to get stereotypical, Kurt, but you know what they say. I think Mexican horse riders are considered some of the best historically. And yeah, I just wanted to fit into that great tradition.
Cite your sources.
Mexican. I don't know, Kurt. Let's think about 1860s, 1865 Mexico, when Mexican horse riders defeated the greatest army in the world at the time, which the French. What did they have? Horses and cactuses. Like, there was really not much else here, and somehow we still won.
Unstoppable combo.
I'm just saying. I just wanted to fit into that great tradition of Mexican horse riders. And
all right, fair enough.
And you know, I know that I look good in a mariachi outfit, which actually at the end of the day is just a jockey's outfit or a vaquero, a little bit of outfit. But anyway, Kurt, all this to say, you're familiar with horses, and I thought I'd come in and please you offer up some laurel leaves from all of the differences we've had and arguments we've had, and tell you a story all about horses.
I'm happy about this unless it ends with the horses falling into a cesspool and dying in excrement.
Well, let's find out together, no, Kurt?
Oh, boy. I'm nervous. I'm nervous, dude.
So among all of the horses that exist in this world, there are some horses that are probably some of the most famous or world-renowned. Do you want to take a guess at which they are?
Are specific horses or types of horses?
That's types of horses. Think region.
Thoroughbred something.
Okay, well, I was...
You know, you really talked me up about being a big fan of horses, but I don't know many technical horse things, unfortunately.
Well, I was going to go more with Mongolian horses. Right, Kurt? I think we know of Mongolian horses. And when we think of Mongolia, there are several things we think about. That is Mongolian beef and Mongolian horses. And, of course, other things in between. I mean, I'm gonna be honest and present my ignorance. I really didn't know much else about Mongolia except for their horses and just how they're real cute, real tiny, and if you go there for travel, you can get to ride them around the Eurasian steppes. So that's a little bit of context on Mongolian horses. Now, speaking of context, let me bring you back to the late 1100s. We're back around the same time that the Erfurt Latrine disaster happened. There was one person that controlled all the land and its surroundings of what we now know as Mongolia with his fearless horde of warrior nomads. Obviously, I'm talking about the late great Genghis Khan.
The very same.
The very same, first and last of his name. He was, historically, we remember him as having one of the greatest empires and just greatest military forces in history, and most of them were comprised of people on horseback. This was one of the great reasons for...
Yeah, I was going to say his military literally built on the backs of horses.
Quite literally. And you know, like you said, a great reason of this success was because Mongols were expert horsemen, and there was just expert horsemanship in this entire army. Now, not only were there expert riders, but there were also horseback archers, and it was a horse culture generally, right? We've had horse cultures around the world, but they were probably the best and most renowned. But a lot of this nomadic tribe's reputation and just success can be attributed to the horses themselves. Now, Kurt, I don't know if you know too much about Mongolian horses, but if you picture them, they seem to be a little short, a little small, and relatively stocky, right? Like they're just kind of beefy, short cakes. I don't know how to say that.
Just little sausages.
Just little sausages. But this actually gives them a lot of benefits, especially for the region that they're living in. Particularly, they are very strong horses. They can carry a lot of weight on them, and without getting terribly burdened by the weight that they have on their backs. Not only that, they're very fast. they're very mobile, and if you're being ridden by an experienced horseman, you are going to be very effective. And lastly, they're very versatile. Not only are they used for war, not only are they used as war horses, but they're also used as pack animals. They're used to carry around things. So they really are built for tough, right? They are just the powerhouses of the Mongolian Empire at this point. But the biggest thing and the biggest positive about these guys is that due to their physicality, their physical just strength, they are able to resist such harsh environments that is Mongolia, Siberia, and just northern Eurasian steppe. They can survive heavy winters, and they can survive just wars, and they were used across the Mongolian Empire.
These are some sturdy horses. I had never really thought about this, but like, yeah, you're breeding horses that are going to have to go into tons of conflict, so they got to be like really hardy. But I mean, it makes sense, but I'm a little impressed by these horses. I'm not going to lie.
And they are incredibly well respected too by the culture, by the Mongolian culture. To this day, one of the main drinks is made from horse milk, of Mongolian horse milk.
Okay, right. That's interesting.
So that's just to say they're very well respected in the culture, so much so that they are very much let to be free and roam around, and actually they go graze by themselves, and there are still plenty of wild horses in Mongolia to this very day because they have a lot of freedom that maybe other horses don't enjoy. And not only that, but they're also left outside all year. They never get brought into stables or anything, just because that's just how strong they are. So they're very well taken care of. They're very well respected. And like I said, there are still a lot of wild horses in Mongolia, to the point where the population of wild horses nears around 3 million in Mongolia to this day. And the population of Mongolia is around 3 million, if not less. So there are most likely more horses than people in Mongolia itself. All I'm saying, Kurt, horse is big deal.
I was going to say, if you think about the math there, that means Mongolia is primarily a country of horses and secondarily a country of people. It's kind of like, in a way, I don't know. It seems like maybe the government should be formed by the horses. I feel like they should be catering to their interests.
I mean, and apparently it seems they are. They're just letting them be free and be wild. I think that's great.
Surely no one's ever tried making their horse a senator before. I just don't see what could go wrong.
Who was it? Caligula would like to have a word. He tried. He wanted his senate of horses.
Roman emperors with lead poisoning have entered the chat.
Let's move back to the present. Now, the majority of the horses that we still have in Mongolia are said to be direct descendants of the horses that Genghis Khan had back in his day. So they've been relatively unchanged for this entire time. For over 1,000 years, you've had the same breed of wild Mongolian horse. They're just so good, Kurt. They're just so good. Right.
1 in 7 people are related to Genghis Khan. 1 in 7 horses are related to Genghis Khan's horse. That's beautiful.
They found it. They found what works, and they stuck with it. You know, I think these guys balanced. Really go against the market. Once we found our good product, we don't need to be replacing it. This is it. We're done. We found the perfect horse.
We found the last horse.
Now, throughout the years, Kurt, some European horse breeders saw the over-reliance or the high reliance that Mongolians had for their horses and decided, hey, this is a great way to make money, and I'm going to try to make as much money as I can from these horses. So over the years, from 1100s to now, there's been plenty of attempts by European and Eastern European and even some Middle Eastern travelers and traders to try to establish their own horse breeder presence in Mongolia and the Far East. Now let's start giving you some examples.
Are they showing up to breed Mongolian horses, or are they like bringing other horses and they're like, oh, they'll love
I'm glad you asked. They are actually bringing other horses and trying to see how they can bring in their horses to the market that that is working. So let me give you a couple of examples. We're going to start with some of the classic meddling Europeans of history, and that's, of course, the Portuguese. somehow the Portuguese are everywhere where we don't want them to be, and they made it to Mongolia somehow.
Yeah, wow, that's impressive, actually. I just simply did not know that there was Portuguese settlement in Mongolia, but good for Portugal.
Well, there really wasn't a Portuguese settlement in Mongolia. There was a Portuguese settlement in Romania, right? And
there was just a Portuguese horse in Mongolia.
A single one. There was a Portuguese horse breeding family or horse breeding industry in Romania named the De Madeira. The Madeira family. Now, the De Madeira breeding family had horses in Romania, and they would trade with the Near East, with the rest of Eastern Europe, and they decided to go into Western Russia and go farther inland into Mongolian territory near China and everything. They have trade books, and they have their ledgers, right? That's what they're called. They're ledgers from the time where we can see that by 1386, they had cut all ties with Mongolia. Entirely, they had lost all business because they had arrived or tried to get into Mongolia by the early 1300s. So not even 100 years after, they returned to Romania and returned to the general area of Turkey with 2 horses, right? They had initially arrived into the Far East with 2,000 horses when they arrived to Mongolia.
That seems good. That seems like they sold a lot of horses.
Not just that, Kurt. Now we'll get to this because we also have stories from Ottoman traders that were settled in Turkey, and they would bring horses, especially those looking east during the Crusades, right? There were a lot of different Ottomans and different people in the region that would get stuck with the Crusades and try to do trade there. Some said, okay, well, they're doing that. That's too problematic. We're going to go to Kazakhstan. We're going to go farther into, Tajikistan, all the Kyrgyzstan, all the stands, and try to sell there. But Mongolia had a presence there too, so they try to go further inland there. And the Turks didn't really keep as exact records as the Madeira family did, but you can also tell that they stopped all contact with Mongolia by 1400. And this is also around the time that Arabic mentality toward the Mongols shifted from respectable horsemen to a, quote, cursed tribe with demonic beasts.
Oh, okay. That's a hard right turn. Yeah, it seems like business did not go very well.
And the reason business did not go very well is because, as we said, Mongolian horses were just completely built different.
Can't compete with these horses.
You cannot, because
they're too little sausagey.
Well, all these different horses that they would bring in, these Romanian, Turkish, all these different Western horses would not survive the harsh realities of the steppes. So those that did survive would be released into the wild to try to get accustomed to that life that Mongolian horses had. But the Mongols would not respect these horses because what would they think? They are not strong. They are weak for our environment, so they're not going to help us for anything. So they would typically be found and killed by Mongolian nomads. They would be completely just killed and used for food or used for other resources, but not for as pack animals and not as war horses because they would just not be strong enough.
I think I'm starting to see how some of this bad blood came about here, because this would be a little bit confusing if you're just some Portuguese person with some horses and you show up and everyone's like, your horses suck. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, okay, let me make these horses a little tougher. Mm-hmm. And then they just hunt them. Yeah, you'd be not super duper happy about that.
Yeah, but maybe you have one issue lying at the roots, Kurt. Maybe your horses do suck. Ever thought about that?
Maybe your horses have a skill issue, bro. Maybe it's your horse's fault.
That's right. It's just a skill issue all around. But here's the thing, Kurt. Here's where we're going to sidestep slightly. And I'm going to tell you that while they are the primary figures that we think about, Mongols were not the only steppe-dwelling nomadic tribes. Because if we move to Syria and if we move to, say, what's now Jordan and the general just Arabian Peninsula, we run into a group named the Bedouins.
They got horses.
Now, the Bedouins, Kurt, were also a nomadic tribe that used to go around the Arabic steppe as well. So these guys have been nomads for their whole life, much like the Mongols were. These guys were also a horse culture. They would travel around, and they just had great numbers spreading across Syria, spreading across Iran, spreading across Egypt, and all these different places. They were huge. They had a huge presence, right? But they were from the Arabic world. They had a very just similar path to the Mongols, just in just different harsh environments, but harsh environments nonetheless. Right? These guys were more in desert locations, but they were still very much forged by the tough environments that the horses were exposed to. In 1756, in what is now Jordan, there was a huge famine and drought that forced a lot of the local Bedouins to move out. Some Bedouins traveled west, but some Bedouins traveled eastward toward Mongolia, toward Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and into China, etc. And these traveling folk, across the next 20 years, from 1756, these Bedouins would start mingling with the culture that they would come across.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of something typical of nomadic tribes. You don't have a set home, so you just adapt to the place that you were in. So they started to be called the Batasin Bedouar, right? So the Bedouins of Batar. So Batasin Bedouar. And they would arrive in Mongolia and assimilate to the local culture. And they started to form their own sort of ethnic group in Mongolia of this Arabic Mongolian cultures coming together in, I don't know, just a mixed bag, a potpourri of nomadic tribes. But the biggest and most important export, other than food, culture, traditions, whatever, was, you guessed it, Kurt, horses.
Oh, yeah. Come on. We're going to go east, offload these horses, and then spit in the eye of Portugal, all in a day's work for the Bedouins.
That's the dream, man. I mean, that's the dream for everyone. It should be, at least. Now, what type of horses did they bring in? It makes sense with the name, but they brought in Arabian horses. Arabian horses right now have a reputation of being very fast horses, and some of the best around the Mideast. And they have a key similarity to these Mongolian horses, and that is they're adapted to harsh environments. They're also from the steppes, but while they're not typically adapted for the cold environments, they're adapted for hot environments. So they are also very sturdy horses. They're a little bigger than the Mongolian horse, but they carry a lot of the same key features. I'm talking about horses like if I was talking about cars. I just realized. But this one comes in black too. And
1 horsepower.
Single horsepower. Go crazy.
A horsepower.
Now, as these guys arrived in the Mongolian steppe, they fit right in. It was like they were back home in their normal environment. And while they were used to hot weather, it was not perfect for them, right? But they started to do a key thing here, Kurt. They started to interbreed with Mongolian horses.
Nice.
Because they had a more protected environment with these Bedouin tribes actually traveling around and meeting all these different horses. They could keep them safe and not just get killed by Mongolian nomads. And as you start interbreeding, the Mongolian powerhouse of a horse and the amazing Arabian horse, boom, super horse comes
At
out.
long last, super horse.
At
2
long
horsepower.
last, super horse. And now the Bedouar, they started breeding and almost exclusively using this new type of horse. They tried to trade with the Mongols, but the Mongols still did not respect the animal. They're
so picky with their horses, dude.
But, they thought they were foreigners. At the end of the day, they're people. They're not from that land. They're just coming in and taking advantage of it. They thought they were demons. They thought they were bastards, right? They were not thoroughbred. They were not pure Mongolian horses. They're not descended from Genghis Khan himself.
Right.
So they were still not very keen on these horses. But the Bataran Bedouars bred them and again used them almost exclusively. Over the coming years, the Bedouar kept growing, kept living in this area, and they kept creeping into different territories that were previously controlled by the Mongols. So fights and skirmishes started happening. Natural. We're back again at land disputes, Kurt. It's 1200s.
It's always more land disputes.
Of course, there's going to be land disputes.
It's just land disputes all the way down.
What else are you going to do? Nothing. Ride around and claim territory.
They haven't invented phrenology yet, so it's all horse stuff.
Just horse stuff. Now, essentially, these were turf wars, right? They were having turf wars in these different regions of Western Mongolia. This came to a head in 1791, Kurt, with the so-called Battle of Jaragalat. So in this Battle of Jaragalat, which is a bit of a, I don't know if it's a region, or I don't know if it's like a place, like a town, but it's this region that's currently sits in China between Kazakhstan and Mongolia. So you're like in crossing steps of these modern countries. So just to give you a bit of a geolocation spot for that. So in this Battle of Jaragalat, this pitted around 1,000 Mongolians versus 2,500 Bataran Bedouins. So you've got a bit of an uneven fight, right? You've got these just 1,000 versus twice your force and a little bit more. The problem here, or not the problem, depending on who you are, is that the Mongols had guns, right? So this is like,
hang on.
This is the near like 1800s, Kurt. This is like 1810. What's going on at this point? Mexico's fighting out for its independence. So while Mexico's trying to get independence from New Spain, we've got the Bataran Bedouins and the Mongols going up against each other. So the Mongols have guns. They easily win against these Bedouins.
Right.
And they win and take the horses captive. So one thing the Mongols had among their culture or their tradition was to not necessarily get rid of the horses. The horses are useful. Horses are part of your culture. A guy can come and go, but horses are forever. That's what I always say.
That's so true.
So they win and they take the horses captive. I know that kind of sounds funny, but they take the horses captive and they return back to camp. Now, back in their camp where they are, waiting out, healing injuries, seeing what's going on, in the middle of the night, something happens, right? Because these horses were sent out with the rest of the horses in to graze, right? They were sent out to munch on some grass.
Right.
As they are wont to do. And they had these big camps, so whatever fence they had or corral they would have, they would make it big enough so that the horses would be, in a way, roaming free. In the middle of the night, Kurt, around 1,000 horses, nearly 1,000 horses, most of these, the horses of your captured enemy, started stampeding back to the camp.
Oops.
And in full force. And they kept running, Kurt. They crushed the camp, and around 600 Mongols died because of the stampede.
All according to plan by the Bedouins,
horses.
dude. They're playing the long game with the super horses. The super horses were the inside agents.
That's right. And they kept running. As I said, these now Arabian Mongolian horses were incredibly tough, were incredibly fast. So they just left. They just disappeared into Mongolian land. And so they were set free. And from that moment on, Mongols respected these horses.
They've seen the light of the super horse.
They had a reputation of being strong horses that were even able to defeat some of their best men. So somehow,
single-handedly, without a rider, evidently.
These horses were finally able to gain the respect of the Mongolian people. And they were set free, and they start breeding in their own right. After years and years of not being accepted, they started intermingling with the horses. So the super horse plus Mongolian horses, they now created a very unique breed of horses named the Susni Guikhid. Okay, that's in Mongolian. The Susni Guikhid. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Again, to all our Mongolian listeners, my sincere apologies. Now, Kurt, this is not where our story ends, because these horses, this intermingling of super horse and Mongolian horse, became now one of the second or third biggest breeds of horses other than the native Mongolian horse.
Right. Who could stop this horse? I mean, it was taking a man head on, fighting Mongolian soldiers in hand-to-hand combat one horse generation ago, and we've upgraded since then.
That's correct. And Kurt, I'm going to take you now to 2024, and I'm going to take you to Churchill Downs, the 2024 Kentucky Derby, the 150th race at Churchill Downs. One of the horses that raced was named Forever Young. I don't know if you've heard of Forever Young.
I haven't,
unique.
but I love it.
Forever Young is unique among the horses that raced in the Kentucky Derby because he was Japanese. Japanese horse, Japanese rider in this big American event. Now, Forever Young did not win. Forever Young ended up in third place, so still one of the top winners of the Kentucky
He's a finalist.
Derby. Forever Young's thoroughbred pedigree in Japan is named the Forai Dadaya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Japanese listeners, please forgive me. But that pedigree, or that family of horses, is said to be descendant of the Susni Guighid, which is, of course, the breed of horses from Mongolia. When translated literally from Mongolian, Susni Guighid translate to blood runners.
Oh, wow, that is an insane name for a breed of horses. That's just, I mean, these are really the super horses. And then, so we had 2 horsepower, and then we combined. What do we have, like 3.5 horsepower now? It's getting insane. No one horse should have all that power.
That's right. That's 3 horsepower per horse. And so, yeah, to this day, we're still seeing the influence of these Mongolian blood runners now finishing in third place in places like the Kentucky Derby.
Wow. That is funny because, like, every major event that happened in this story is like, this will certainly have an impact on the world horse market. It's like a crusade happens, this will affect the world horse market.
The Portuguese seahorses, they got very excited for no reason.
Oh man, I love, I'm always happy to learn about some horses, Luis, because you are correct. Just conceptually as an animal, I'm a big fan of horses, but I also like, it's kind of like the awkward situations that come up when you have cultural exchanges like these. It's really funny to picture a bunch of Portuguese guys being mad because they can't understand why no one wants their horses. And it's also funny to think about, like, the Mongols underestimating these horses so bad that they got trampled to death.
Yeah.
It's also impressive that it's like, once they got the guns, I mean, rightfully so, that's a pretty big game changer. Like, I feel like they really rolled over the Bedouins with the guns. Not able to stop the horses, evidently, though. Horses stronger than guns.
I mean, sometimes, you sit and wonder for so long whether or not you can create a super horse that you don't stop and wonder whether or not you should create a super horse.
That's so true. But we're better off for it,
I think we are better off for it. And now we've got some really cool horses that are still doing really cool horse stuff around the world. Maybe they're not trampling camp-dwelling nomads, but they're winning the Kentucky Derby. So that's something.
It's true. They're not killing camp-dwelling nomads, but I don't think that's by choice. I think, hey, let them loose out of that stable one time. These horses will take over.
Yeah. Do you think they have, that instinct? That killer instinct of,
they tasted blood.
They see a camp and they immediately get mad. Yeah, they've tasted blood and now they run for it.
Yeah, no,
I'm not
like a conspiratorial person, but like I 1,000% believe right now that the only thing stopping these horses from world domination is that they don't have opposable thumbs. Like that's all that's standing between us and the end of humanity, frankly. And I kind of love that. I think that's really beautiful, Some people die by the horse uprising. Yeah. Some people die falling into a vat of excrement. Life is full of variety.
Live by the horse, die by the poop. Okay, Kurt. So with that, we've reached the end of our 2 stories. What do you think, Kurt? Initial thoughts of these two stories.
I really like the just kind of variety of types of stories we have. I feel like that's the thing I'm thinking of first because, our horse story had like actually some interesting history for it, and people who just love history for the sake of history, it's always fun to watch how those things kind of twist and turn and work their ways out in consequences that you could not have possibly foreseen. And it's even fun that it's like, at times in the middle, maybe like a little bit boring, where we're just talking about like, okay, these people are going to try to trade these horses, but that it's going to end up being like, well, if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have applesauce or something like that. So, it's always fun to follow us along the way. And then on the other side, I kind of said in the beginning I was getting nervous when you started describing all the people in the room, but I do think that I saw this floor caving in like maybe a couple paragraphs before you got to it, and even knowing it was going to happen, that was just still so wild to be hearing play by play. You assume that at some point a group of people has died falling into a latrine, but somehow I wouldn't have thought it'd be quite that dramatic. So I feel like you've hit every note here. We got a little intrigue, we learned a little, we got discussed a little, and it was pretty wild the whole way through.
Overall, some fun. Well, with that, Kurt, I think it's time then to move on.
Oh, yeah.
To our least favorite part of the show, which of course is deliberation. Alrighty, Kurt. So let me remind you real quick of the two stories that you just heard. Of course, the one that came just before this was the Mongolian blood horses, the blood runners, which were the super horse created by mixing Arabian horses with Mongolian horses and eventually leading to an incredible horse that was well respected by Mongolian culture that would lead to third place at Churchill Downs in the 150th edition of the Kentucky Derby.
La la.
And the first story was, of course, the Erfurt latrine disaster, where King Henry VI of Germany invited too many nobles to resolve a land dispute. So many, in fact, that the floorboards started to break open and, well, let a bunch of nobles fall into the latrine that was built below, killing from 60 to 100 people who drowned in human excrement. Kurt, your thoughts?
My first thought is that I can only say so many times that a bunch of people falling into a vat of poop and dying is funny before it becomes insensitive. But I mean, I'm sorry, it just really is. Okay, like, what kind of wild things happen in history, and it's it's completely plausible. Like, of course, they would not be expecting this room to be completely full with people wearing metal armor and whatnot. Yeah. It's just the kind of weird things that, we were joking about, like, oh, there's no OSHA in this time. But seriously, these are the things that happened in the past when people didn't have any regulations or any concept of, like, maybe we should consider if this floor will break. And of course, the fact that it all takes place behind a land dispute or assumed land dispute, we don't even know for sure, just makes it even better because, I think the best stories from that time period are always like, a bunch of rich people are fighting over stupid stuff, and then the weirdest thing imaginable happens, and everyone hated it. Yeah, I will say I genuinely am a little disappointed that King Henry didn't have the presence of mind to make these guys hang over the cesspool until one of them conceded to give up the land dispute. Even if they both really wanted out, I don't know. I just think that was a golden opportunity. But you know what? Maybe history will repeat itself someday. If anyone ever finds himself in that situation, make sure you make one of the guys concede.
Crossing my fingers.
My public service announcement. Now, let's go to the second story here, our horse extravaganza, the many series of events and migrations and intercontinental trade that led to the most amazing horse name ever, the Blood Runners. I mean, come on. This is like the horses out of a post-apocalyptic movie or something. What is its name? But it's like I was saying before, it's really fun for people who just love history for the sake of history to follow along with these kinds of things where it's weird and, the Portuguese got kicked out and that's funny. And then there's nomadic tribes fighting and we made a 2-horsepower horse. You got to love that. But I don't want to move on too fast from the fact that, like, a whole bunch of really seasoned warriors did, in fact, get killed by horses running really fast in their direction. That's a disaster that is, not on par with breaking through the floor of the basilica and falling into a cesspool, but it's up there. It's high.
Yeah, I think we forget about all these stories. We tend to have a lot of fun in the telling of them. That we have to sit down and realize that, oh no, people died, and a significant number of people died too.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I think maybe, I don't know how this reflects on me, but the problem with my brain is that I'm like, wow, that's a fun story. Oh, it's sad people died, but they died in a funny way, so we're back, baby. Come on.
Right.
But, I guess that's just really a very long way of saying I thoroughly enjoyed both of those stories, Luis. Now, let me talk about some of the things that kind of stuck out for me. The first one, it's like, got a feeling where it's such a cohesive story that it could either be exactly a very perfect historical story or a very classically made up Luis story, which always makes me a little nervous. And somehow the fact that it takes place in a church is really just adding to that. But, I feel like there's not really much to say because the setup for it, the mystery land dispute, I could totally see that happening. I could totally see the overlooking of the floor and falling into the cesspool. It's just wild. But it is one of those stories that's, I guess, it's so short that it's hard to really say either way. Now, moving on to our Mongolian horse story, I will say, oddly enough, one thing that gave me a little bit of pause was you talking about the population of 3 million wild horses in Mongolia. That's in present-day Mongolia, correct?
Yeah, present-day Mongolia, yes.
So allegedly, right now in this moment, 3 million wild horses running around. Look out! Don't
They're
get
out
in the
there.
way, They're loose. I will say I know, or at least I think I know. I've heard this said that there are no more wild horses left. There's feral horses, which are descendants of domesticated horses. But I don't think that you would have known that distinction. So it's very possible they have tons of horses that are feral, but just that number is so big and, society has spread out so much. It does make me wonder a little bit. Now, that being said, when we get into all the Portuguese are in here and the Crusades are in here, I mean, come on, that's too perfect. That's gotta be legitimate history, I feel like, right? Surely you would have trimmed that out. We had 4 different generations of horses before we got to forever young. And so I was feeling, pretty good about that. But then when we make our big time jump to the previously mentioned forever young, I get a little nervous because, I can picture what it's like to make up stories for this podcast. And I can very much see you hearing about that. It's notable that this horse forever young won third in the Kentucky Derby, and then coming up with this idea of all this stuff backfilling this bizarre history of horse trading, so on and so forth, nomadic stepping and blood running. So that does make me a little nervous, I will say, but I think what is stronger than that is my sense that you would absolutely make up a story in which a bunch of noble people fell into a vat of excrement in a church over a land dispute. And that's just coming in so loud and clear to my brain. There's an alarm going off. If you don't pick that story as the false story and it's false, you got to quit this podcast because that's just so perfectly Luis. The only thing that could have been better is if we'd had a Mexico cameo somehow, but you can't win them all. But I think you can tell where I'm going here, Luis. Who knows what this says about me, but it actually will make me a little sad if this story is not true. But I unfortunately think I'm doubting the falling through the St. Peter's Church into excrement vat story.
All right, Kurt, you're choosing the Erfurt disaster as the false story then.
That's true. I'm a believer in the blood runner. I'm not a believer in the Erfurt cesspool.
Well, Kurt, it is my pleasure to tell you that the Erfurt latrine disaster is the true story, actually.
Oh, big win. A bunch of people died in a cesspool.
Hey, a bunch of noble people died in a cesspool. I think it's important to make that distinction.
It is very important.
It's critical.
Okay,
it's a critical difference.
Did I get anything right, Luis? Was I at least right about your story inspiration behind this horse story?
First of all, Kurt, let me tell you, there are 3 million horses living in Mongolia, and a good chunk of them are indeed wild.
Wowie.
Maybe not 3 million. but I know that there's just more than 3 million horses in Mongolia. So that's one of the true points of jumping off. Now, let me tell you, Kurt, I started writing the Mongolian horse story, after I had finished kind of getting my mind around the Erfurt Latrine disaster, because I wanted to find ironic ways of dying. And I think just being trampled by horses you love was kind of funny to me, but it just kept growing. I started pulling on threads that I did not expect to pull, Kurt. And so I started making up this whole deal about Mongolian horses and other horses coming in to try to take, I don't know, Mongolia by horse force.
By hoof.
And, by hoof. That's right. And I made up this whole entire story. And while I was finished with it, I decided to go check, I don't know, the Kentucky Derby, because I know it happened not too long ago. And I saw that about, I believe, 2 horses that won or that ended up in the top 10 were Japanese horses. And I said, hold on, there's a connection to that side of the world. So that's when I connected it. Connecting it to the Kentucky Derby was one final Hail Mary from me, Kurt. It didn't initially go from there. I just got too much into the horse lore. But I can tell you that the reality of this story is that there are a lot of horses in Mongolia. They really love their horses, and that they're very strong boys. Other than that, everything else is made up.
Wow, that was thorough. I mean, there were a lot of pieces in there, a lot of stuff contributing before we got to the payoff. I kind of feel like this is a bit of a role reversal when you're like, Kurt, that fake story had so much legal detail in it that I didn't even pay attention for the middle 10 minutes. I'm like, I forgot the first half of that. There's just too many horses and people trying to sell horses and whatnot. So, yeah, I can, now that you're saying that, I can see where you're like, yeah, I just kept getting more and more threads that I had to follow, and they all got woven in here. That's props to you for the amount of work and research you must have put into that, because there's no small feat to fabricate that much information. Can I at least get like a consolation prize? Is Forever Young at least real?
Forever Young is real, and he is a Japanese horse, and he did win 3rd place. So Forever Young is a real horse that was born in 2021, and he is out there being great. So
our boy
Forever Young is still kicking out there. But yeah, no, and you're right. I think the Portuguese detail, I was recently reading up on the Jesuits, as one does, and you realize that anywhere you go in Asia where the Jesuits went to visit, it's always the Portuguese Jesuits. It's always the Portuguese. Why is it the Portuguese? They just like to be in everyone's business.
It just is, dude. That's so funny. When you said that, I was like, man, that's so true. And at first I was like, it's the English, it's the French. No, of course it's the Portuguese. Spain, Italy, stay home. You're never going to go to Siberia, but Portugal's here and they're trying to sell some horses.
But I think throughout history, you just always run across just some random Portuguese dude just hanging around. And you just always accept that they're there. You never doubt the fact that the Portuguese somehow made it here. I think that's why I included that. I will say,
that was really nice.
But let me tell you real quick about the Erfurt Latrine disaster.
Please give me all the detail about this.
Well, frankly, Kurt, I've given you all the detail. Like you said,
I know. I
this
can
is
tell.
just such an open and shut case that I was trying to stretch out some of the details to make it last longer, because I was practicing saying this story and I realized, this is very short. Everything we know about the Erfurt Latrine disaster is that this guy brought in these 2 parties, these 2 aggrieved parties, and everyone brought their friends, and they just fell into poop. And that's it, honestly. And I think that's just great. That's lovely. And there's really not much else to go from there. I mean, if you go visit Erfurt, it's a place, a relatively famous place. That's where Napoleon Bonaparte met German poet Goethe. So, they had a meeting in Erfurt. Also, some of my family members from my past, some of my ancestors were from Erfurt. So, I don't know, personal connection there.
Wow.
We'll
So
see.
in another timeline, maybe you don't exist because your ancestors fell in the cesspool.
Yeah, I was one of the lucky ones. One of the lucky ones, Kurt. They put up a memorial in town for my great-great-grandfather who didn't die in the latrine disaster.
Wow. That's amazing. So is that church still there? Can one go visit the site of the Air Fort latrine disaster?
Yes, Kurt. We can go to the Citadel now, present day.
Oh, wow.
And
okay. Well, let's wrap this up so we can start on this pilgrimage then, because I got to clear my schedule. I know what I'm doing this week.
Well, with that, Kurt, what does that bring our score to?
Makes it 6-2, which I gotta stop being so comfortable in losing these episodes. You know, I'm just so happy to hear about 60 to 100 noblemen dying in a latrine that I'm not at all worried about the fact that this season is quickly slipping away from me. So yeah, that's 6-2 with you in the lead.
My goodness, yeah, you're right. You do lose yourself quick when you see nobility fall into excrement.
Frankly, lost in the sauce, and it was not smelling well.
Oh, disgusting. Well, did you get lost in the sauce? Please let us know. Feel free to reach out to us and tell us if you fell for the latrine trap or for the horse boys. We are on Instagram at UnbelievablePod. You can also find us on Twitter, also known as X, at UnbelievablePC. If you like the show, please give it a rate. If you didn't like the show, walk away. You don't have to do anything. See, we make it easy on you. But in any case, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Unbelievable. We'll catch you next time when hopefully Kurt can fool me with one of his stories.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. And remember, everyone, the chances of you dying by falling into a latrine are low, but they're never zero. Okay? Stay safe out there. Bye, y'all.
See ya.